This is Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time, episode number 69, I guess. Maybe it will be episode 1 of the new Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time. It's just all going to depend on whether or not when I get my new plan with Libsyn, or when I re-up my plan with Libsyn, whether or not they're going to show the old episodes or, make them available or not. But if you're old to the show and you thought I was gone, then welcome back to the show. I'm not gone. I thought I was myself. But I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm not gone. I've come back and brought the show back because basically I just missed it too much, and I've done some revamping, some rethinking of it, some restructuring of Road Noise, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes. But if you're new and this is your first time listening to the show, thank you and welcome, and I'm glad you're with me. I'm glad you're riding alongside me in the passenger seat as we learn to live life 1 mile at a time. I'm Michael Blackston, and there are a couple of new things that are going on for both the old people that are listening, old listeners that have listened for a while. You might be young, I don't know. But new listeners and people who have been listening for a while, some things are going to be new to you, some things are going to be changed. And so let's just jump right into the reason I brought this back, and then I'll go into what the changes are going to be. The reason I brought this show back is because basically I missed it. I travel all over the Southeast doing my work as a granite etcher. I run my own company. And very shortly after I stopped doing the podcast, I missed it so terribly. Even though I didn't get a lot of feedback from listeners, I did have some listeners. And I thought that it would just be gone and done with. I kind of thought there might be a weight lifted off of my shoulders, but instead there was more of a weight that was put on my shoulders. I guess after doing a podcast for over a year, getting 68 episodes in, 69 really if you count the 000 episode, the very first one called An Emotional Introduction. There were 69 previously recorded, and if you count those, you get used to doing it. I mean, I was doing it every single week almost, very consistently, and it becomes a habit, and habits are hard to break. And so I started missing listeners that I didn't even know were there. It's just, I felt like people were with me. They were listening and learning, and to learn life 1 mile at a time with me. And it didn't take long before I realized I really missed it. I really missed it. And every time I would get in the car, I would think of, okay, well, maybe I should start another podcast on the road. Maybe I should do this or do that. And everything kept pointing back to Road Noise. You had something good going there, even if it didn't have a huge listenership. You had built some relationships. There were some people that listened on a regular basis, and you built those relationships. Why not just bring it back? And I'd push it away, and I'd push it away, and then it just came back over and over again that maybe Road Noise wasn't done. Maybe what happened is what happened 2 or 3 times during the duration of those 60 some odd episodes, that I would get burned out. Life would get busy. I would feel overwhelmed. I would feel like I was putting a lot of work in for no result, because nobody was ever, well, I shouldn't say ever, people were rarely contacting me and telling me they even listened, much less enjoyed what they were hearing. Although I did have a few, but it was kind of sporadic. And even though I know the sun's just coming up, it's 6:46 a.m. on the East Coast, or Eastern Standard Time. I'm toward the East Coast, and the sun's coming up and it keeps getting in my eyes, so I have to put down my visor. But what was I saying? Even though it was sporadic, they were there. And so the long and short of it is I missed it, and I decided that what I was doing was just needing a break from time to time. And a lot of people who have podcasts do seasons. I'm not going to be doing seasons. I'm going to keep this going But what I realized I probably should have just done was I should have done an episode that said, instead of I'm done with this, I'm leaving, it's too much, I'm tired of it, or whatever I said. I haven't listened back to that episode recently. But what I should have done was said, I'm going to take a break for a few weeks. I'll be back. And I should have, or I wish I had known. Maybe I can't say that I should have because I just learned this. But I wish I had known how bad I would miss road noise once I stopped it. And so I started thinking, okay, what was going wrong with it, or what was I not looking forward to about it? What did the listeners that did make comments and did give me feedback, what were they saying they enjoyed about it that I need to keep doing? What needs to be changed? And what can I do to increase listenership or viewership now? And I'll tell you about that in a minute. If you're watching this, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're just listening to this, I'll tell you about it. Anyway, what can I do to increase the participation, either listening or watching with an audience? And how can I grow that audience? And I think it is being more of a leader. So I've taken some things away that I dreaded doing. And part of the reason that I burned out, I think, is because road noise made a lot of changes from episode 1 all the way up until episode 68. There were a lot of changes because I really wasn't sure what I wanted it to be. And who knows if I'm sure what I want it to be now. But I want to get back to what it originally was going to be. And originally, if you go back and listen to the emotional introduction episode, that's episode 000, and if I don't have it up right when you're watching this, I'm going to do my best to get it up. And get it onto the accounts and everything so you can go back and listen to those past episodes. And what I said in it was that this was going to be an audio journal of my life so that you could learn to live life 1 mile at a time with me as I learned to do it. And I was doing that by just being transparent about my life, telling you about my everyday life, telling you about my week, getting to know you through letting you get to know me, my family, the things that happen, telling you stories about my family and my childhood and things like that. It was centered around me as the focal point for, I guess, the main character of these stories and the people in my life. And I guess after a while, I started feeling like that was sort of narcissistic, that who cares about me? Who cares about my life? And I was feeling like I was being a little arrogant by keeping myself as the main focus. And so I changed things up and I started doing topics. I started talking about what I think on certain topics and trying to take the focal point off me in the center of it. And there's still a part of me that wants to keep from sounding narcissistic and arrogant because I really don't want to. But this was going to be an audio journal that my kids could take and I could make available to them later in life. My kids, their grandkids, for generations down, as long as we had storage capability for this thing. And as long as the world was around, they could hear their ancestor, what he thought about certain subjects, what happened in his life. That was the original plan for Road Noise. And over the year and a half, it kind of changed because I was thinking I want to grow my audience and maybe I should just go to topics. Maybe I should just say, okay, this is going to be about clinical depression. Well, what I realized was I was drawing... That was becoming tiring to me. It was becoming tiresome to me. It's been a while since I've done this, and my mouth is not accustomed to it. My throat's wanting to get dry. My mouth's wanting to get dry, so I'm going to try to stay lubricated here as I do this and I get back into the groove of recording these as I drive. I also just got over a cold in the last couple of weeks. I had a bad chest congestion type thing. And it's left my throat and my voice very weak. But anyway, so here's what's going to be new. Here's how I said or what I said I wanted to do if I was going to get back into Road Noise Life 1 mile at a time and continue it. First of all, I don't want to dread it. Coming up with those topics became, like I said, tiresome. I would have to have a list of topics that I was going to talk about. And okay, I want to talk about this. Well, I don't want to talk about that. Well, okay, I'm filling this one this week. I noticed that I was more interested in doing it earlier, instead of trying so hard to be like everybody else. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about road signs and how they clutter our roads. You know, maybe road signs cluttering the roads might be interesting to somebody, but I don't need to bend my podcast to try to grow listeners based on that type of thing if it's going to make me, A, sound like everybody else, and B, not interested in it myself. The first person that needs to be interested in this podcast is the person who's presenting it to you, and that's me. And so if I'm not interested, it's going to become stale. I'll grow some listenership, but I really think I might grow better and do you a better service and enjoy it, and do a better service to the ancestors that I want to leave these recorded documentations for, if I'm myself and if I enjoy it. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going back to the old format. I'm going to tell you about my life. I'm going to tell you what happened during the week to me, things that were interesting. If nothing interested happened and I'm not feeling it, you may not get an episode that week. I'm going to try to do it every week. And most of the times, interesting enough things happen to me that I can tell you about, that I can hopefully relay to you. And I need to keep at least one hand on the wheel. I've got this hands-free headset so I can safely drive here. I used to hold a microphone. But things that are in my life, but that you can relate and parlay over into your life and your experiences, so that we can do this learning to live life 1 mile at a time together. Secondly, I'm going to video it if I can. If you're seeing this, it's probably because I believe it's going to work to video it. There's going to be a lot of work that goes along with it, because the audio from the camera on my iPhone, which is mounted on my windshield right here, is not good enough for me, for production quality. So I'm going to actually take the audio that I'm getting from this handheld, or from this hands-free microphone that will be served as the audio file for the podcast. I'm going to silence the audio from the camera and overlay the audio from this microphone, so you've got a good production value, or at least as good as you can with the road noise under you. That's another thing. If you're not new to the podcast, you know what the sound under my voice is. That's the sound of the road, hence the reason we call it road noise. But if you're new, that's what you're hearing. In fact, you may have just heard a change in the sound. That don't look good. I think those people went off the road, but I think everybody looked okay. The sound of the road, the sound under my voice is the noise from the road, hence the reason I called it road noise. So if you're new, that's what you're hearing, and that's what you'll continue to hear unless I take a wild hair to make a recording while I'm parked or in the hotel room. But I got a couple of other podcasts in the works that have been in the works for a while, but I can't get I don't want to release them until I've got everything right the way I want it, as far as the branding, show art and stuff like that, and formatting. So I was talking about these podcasts, having them in the works before I took a break several weeks ago, and they're still in the works, although they are closer. But this one is one I can do while I drive, and so that's what I'm going to do every week. I'm going to tell you about my life. I'm also going to give you a question to ponder every week, and what I'm going to encourage you to do, I really want to grow this podcast. I really want to grow it and this YouTube video. If you'll subscribe to the YouTube video and comment there, leave me your answers to these questions. I'm going to have a question of the week that you can answer, and I'll have a question that I'll ask later in the episode for this week. And during the week, if you will answer it, you can get in touch with me via my email, and I'll give you that at the end of the show. I also have a voicemail line that I think is still set up. If not, I will set one up. I'll give you that at the end of the show as well. And you can leave your answers to the question that I give you at the, at some point during the show. And I'd like to discuss them. And there will be different people. I'll give you a shout out from time to time. If I pick your question or your answer, I'll give you a shout out on the show and mention you. and a thank you for listening, and a thank you for participating. But I really encourage you to answer the question, think on it, give me good, honest answers, good thought-provoking answers, because I think that's what I'm missing. I'm thinking participation requires somebody to lead you into it. It's just like when you're in a small group and somebody says, does anybody want to lead off with their story of such and such happening to them or whatever? And everybody kind of looks at each other and nobody wants to start. But then once somebody starts, once somebody leads the rest of the group into it, everybody else wants to participate. I'm thinking that might be the psychology behind this, and I'm hoping that that will work. And I'm not using you as a psychological experiment, but I just want to lead you into it. So I'm going to give you the question, and please feel free to answer me. Rock just hit my windshield, and I'm making sure there's no crack. If you'll remember, if you're a previous listener, I used to do a positive review at the end of every episode. The problem with that, I came to hate the idea of trying to find a positive review because I had to think of something. It got boring. I would like, okay, what's something I can review that I can give a positive review for? And half the time I couldn't come up with anything. Half the time I'd have to kind of mail it in with something that was just kind of vanilla because he got old. I said I was not going to give any negative reviews. I wanted to stay positive. Well, then things would happen and I would think, well, I really would like to review this, but I'd like to kind of make it a negative review because this is something I want to warn my listeners about. I want to give them a heads up about something, but I can't because I've called it a positive review. So I'm cutting the positive review, and I'm still going to do a review, but I'm going to keep it to kind of stuff you like to do, entertainment type stuff. It ended up being books and movies most of the time, TV shows and stuff like that I would do in the past. So I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it along those genres, but I'm not going to just make it positive. If I see a movie that is bad, I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm going to tell you why I thought it was bad. You may love it, and that's your choice, but I'm going to tell you why I thought it was bad. And I've got one at the end of this. I've actually got two because I'm coming back. I'm going to go ahead and give you two because there's one movie that I've seen since the last time I did an episode of Road Noise versus now, or between then and now, that I have fallen in love with and may very well be my favorite movie of all time. And one of those things that, I cry several times in it every time I see it. I've seen it 3 times now, and I'm just obsessed with this movie. So I'll tell you about that, and then I'm going to also tell you about a movie I just saw that just came out. Today is May the 2nd, 2017, and my wife and I went to see this movie and just had to stare at each other with these kind of confused looks on our faces when it ended because basically the movie made no sense, and I'll tell you all about it. So really, this is going to be a longer episode than most. That's the other thing. I'm probably going to keep them between 15 minutes and 30 minutes long. One of the other reasons that I stopped doing this podcast before was because it was costing me money, and excuse me, and because I had these other ones on the horizon, I have to pay for hosting for all of them. So basically the way it works out, for you to have the best audio quality, I have to record these files and convert them from WAV files, WAV files, into MP3 files at different bit rates. And what that means is different qualities of sound. And I can do it at a lower quality of sound, but I want to give you the best I can. But the best I can requires more megabytes per file. Well, when you go to your host for your RSS feed for a podcast, you buy a plan that's based on how many megabytes you use per month. So the longer you do your episodes, the more megabytes you're going to use. So I'm going to try to cut the cost and have a smaller payment plan because these other podcasts are coming. And I've also got started my Funny Messy Life blog back, and I have to pay for serving, a server there, hosting there. There's a lot of money that comes out of my pocket for doing this type of thing, so I'm going to try to lower the time that these episodes are in order to lower the megabytes in order to be able to survive on a lower price point. Unless you decide you want to hey, I'd like to hear more. I'd like these podcasts to be longer. I just want more for every episode. I'll be glad to do that, but it's going to require that you become a supporter and help me out with the cost of these podcasts in order to make me able to make them longer. And I'll tell you at the end of this episode how to do that via Patreon at patreon.com. So let's get into that. That's a long explanation, but I felt like that was needed to kind of bridge the gap between episode 68 and episode 69, or the old road noise versus the new road noise. It just kind of depends on what happens when I re-up my membership with Libsyn, and I'll know that hopefully by the end of the day. So I'm going to quickly tell you about some things that have been going on since I last talked to you. If you listened before, you know that I had been diagnosed with high blood pressure, and I was taking a medication and having to watch my diet, and I had started a health journey. I called it Health Journey 2017. Well, I kind of blew that up in short order, and I got back up to 197 pounds. I vowed I would not get to 200, and luckily I did not see that 200 on the scale, but I got really close at 197 pounds. And then my wife has been noticing for years that I go to the bathroom a lot and I'm constantly thirsty. Speaking of that, well, you'll notice I'm drinking water. Product placement. Don't worry, Aquafina. Like you'd be worried, but Aquafina does not sponsor the show, but Aquafina is good water. So here, there's a free plug for Aquafina. She noticed I was thirsty all the time and going to the bathroom all the time, which is a sign of diabetes. And it does run on my mother's side of the family. And it runs on both sides, I think, of my wife's family. I know it runs on her father's side. So she knows a lot about it. And I know a little bit about it. She wanted me to get a checkup, and she's been hounding me for years to go get a checkup. Well, I finally did. I said, okay, I will. And I had blood drawn, and the doctor called me back a couple of weeks later and said, okay, your blood tests came back, and you have type 2 diabetes. So I had been diagnosed with diabetes. They said that they thought that it was early enough that I could reverse it by taking a little bit of medication and mainly by adjusting my health and eating habits. Getting my exercise, which I haven't started doing as much as I need to, but I'm slowly getting back into the walk-in, and I'm going to just kind of work up to it. But also by really adjusting my eating habits. And that breaks me into what I'm doing now, which is what my wife has been doing, called the ketogenic diet. And it's not really as much of a diet. That's kind of a misrepresentation of it, because although you can look at it as a diet, it's not something that you do to get down to your goal weight and then stop. It is a lifestyle. It's a way of training yourself to eat that is low carb, very, very low carb, and little to no sugar, processed sugar, and stuff like that. And I might get into the details of that in another episode, but right now I won't go into all of that detail, other than to say it has worked very well for me, and I have now gotten back down from 197 to 183.0, which is what the scales showed this morning at 3 o'clock when I got up, 183.0, and that is very good for me, as I've been doing this about 3 weeks. So, that's where I stand. My goal is 165 to 170. And we're going to kind of look at things there and see how I look and how I feel at that weight. A lot of people think that I'll be too thin by then, but that's what the doctor said I really needed to kind of have as a goal. Hopefully I'll be putting on more weight at that, once I get there, I'll be putting on more weight in the form of muscle, and maybe the scale will go up in a good way. We'll see. So my goal is 165 to 170, and at this point I'm at 183.0. So one of the things I'm going to do in the future with this episode, as I promised to do before I quit it before, was to keep listeners and now viewers in touch with what's happening, and so hopefully it can be an encouragement to you. Also want to tell you about a new, and this isn't really a review, but I do love it. I had to go buy a piece of equipment last week. The iPad Pro 12.9. It is the big iPad, huge screen iPad. It's a 12.9 inch screen. And the reason I had to buy that is because I recently hired a young lady who was on my group at My Everything Arts on Facebook, and someone I know very well to be a great artist. I hired her to help me do layouts for my job because it was becoming overwhelming. I've got so much work that I didn't have time to do the layouts and do the work without taking more time away from my family. So I hired her to do this, and she was doing such a great job on her iPad. Well, my iPad broke down. I had an original first generation iPad, and I used it until the wheels fell off. It had been cracked for years, but it worked, and I used it. And see, she does her layouts on the iPad and sends them up to me digitally, and I'm able to send them to my customers digitally. But if they want to change, sometimes they want a minor change. Like one of the last ones, she had put the guy in a boat, and they asked for a man in a boat fishing, and she put him in a button-down shirt. Well, they decided that was fine, but they wanted him in a t-shirt and take off the pocket. I'm not gonna send that back to her just for her to make that little tiny change. That could get very confusing. I can make little tiny changes like that, you know, on the fly really quick and send it back. There was no reason to send it back to her, and I was doing that on my iPad. But when my iPad died, I had no way to make those changes. So I went and bought the iPad Pro 12.9 in the heart of authenticity. I will tell you, it cost me a total of $963. It was actually $962.93, I think. It was something like that. So $963. That included buying the Apple Pencil, I think it's called the Apple Pencil. And what that is one of the reasons I went ahead and bought what I bought. Using a stylus, just the regular stylus with kind of the bulbous rubber head on it, I could do some fairly detailed work on my old iPad, but that bulbous pen was stylus was very limiting to me. However, the Apple Pencil has a sharp point on it. You're able to do all sorts of things. If you hold it straight up and down, it has a fine point with lots of detail that you can do lots of detail. Also, it's pressure sensitive, so I can make a very light line or I can make a very dark line depending on how much pressure I put on the iPad with it. Or I can kind of hold it like you would a regular pencil, and if you hold a regular sharp pencil to the side and do some shading, you can get a bolder shading type of situation. Well, the Apple Pencil does the exact thing. You can hold it to the side and get that shading quality, or hold it straight up and down just like a regular pencil. And not only that, it's cordless. You have to keep it charged, but it works via Bluetooth. You connect the pen to the iPad via Bluetooth. I imagine it might work on my iPhone. I have an iPhone 7 Plus, and it might work that way, but I don't really see a need to do that. But by doing this, and with the 12.9 inch screen, I am able to get very, very good detail. And as a matter of fact, now I'm kind of excited because I'm planning on doing a side hustle with prints. Might need to make notes for next week and tell you all about that. I'm hoping to sell some prints and do some craft shows and stuff to make a little money so that we can go to Disney World every year. And part of that, I'm hoping to do some prints digitally via my iPad, because now with the free Adobe app that I was able to put on there, the amount of detail that looks just like you were doing it on a regular piece of paper is outstanding. And I'm thinking I'm going to be able to make some fine art there on the iPad Pro. So I've gotten one of those this week. Cost me some money, but I had it put away, and it's a tax write-off, and all is well and good with that. So I've told you about diabetes. I've told you about my old iPad dying and getting the new one. And this last thing I want to tell you about before I give you the question of the week and then my review and then close out this episode is, past listeners will also note that I am a devout Christian, very spiritual. And I think I mentioned in the last episode that I had shied away a little bit, not being ashamed of my Christianity, but kind of shied away from that somewhat in the Road Noise podcast because I didn't want that to be the main focus. I would obviously not be ashamed of it, but at the same time, I didn't want it to be a main focus. Well, I'm just going to live out loud, and I've decided I'm going to do that. And in these past few weeks that I have not been doing the show, I have grown by leaps and bounds in my relationship to Jesus. And I want to shout that from the mountaintop. Take another sip of my water here. I want to shout that from the mountaintop. And this story will be one of those. This is a story, an amazing story that happened to me last week. And while it is shrouded in tragedy, heartache, sadness, it brought me closer to God and hopefully will bring a loved one closer to God as well, just through my engagement in it. And here's what happened. I was etching in Conway, South Carolina last week. And I was leaning over this die. It was hot outside. It's April, but it was hot, like 80-something degrees. And to me, that's hot, especially when you're working on a polished black granite stone. Just soaks in that heat and holds it there. I was miserable, and I was just praying, and I was like, God, make things a little easier to handle for me, and yada, yada, yada. I am going to have to stop in just a minute and get some gas. So God, make things easier for me here. And then I just was in my prayer zone. And all of a sudden, a family member of mine who I love very much popped into my head, just randomly, just out of the blue, just popped into my head. And I felt God tell me, well, first of all, I started praying for him, but that everything would be all right. But then I felt like God was telling me, I want you to text him, and I want you to tell him first that you're praying for him, give him some encouragement that way, but then I want you to let him know, I want you to say this: if you have been calling out to God, he wants you to know that he hears you. Well, when you text somebody that, or say that to somebody, kind of sometimes, especially if they're not a believer, it make you sound like a nut. And that's what I put on there. I said, I won't say his name, but I told him first that I was praying for him and I loved him, and I hope everything was going well, but that I felt like, I said, I don't want to sound like a nut, but you know that I don't take these spiritual things lightly, and every time I have been prompted to do this by God, the person on the other end has replied that it was perfect timing. They needed that right then, right there. And so I don't question it. I don't take it lightly. So if this makes me sound like a nut, I'm sorry, but God wants you to know that if you're crying out to him, he wants you to know he hears you. His response back was, thank you. Have you been talking to Mom? And I said, no, I haven't spoken to your mom. In fact, you popped into my head randomly. That's why I said this sounded crazy, because this is just random. He and I hadn't spoken in a while. And he said, my wife asked me for a divorce last night. And my knees just about buckled. It wasn't news I wanted to hear, but he was in pain. He'd been crying out. He didn't say he'd been crying out to God, but I suspect he had. He didn't want this. He's hurting. And God prompted me out of the blue, moved me overwhelmingly to say this to him right in his moment of need. And my knees just about buckled because I was being used of God that way. I was being used as his vessel. And what it hit me as was, as a Christian, and if you're a Christian as well, it's one thing to believe in God and to know there is a God and to have a relationship with Jesus and to pray and to be in communication. But when he uses you in a tangible way like that, that is just moving, and not only just moves you personally, but has an effect on somebody else in a very big way, where it's obvious that this is a God thing, it will rock your world, and it rocked my world. So if you're a prayer warrior, I ask for you to pray for my family member. And since then, yesterday, I found out about another family member whose wife asked him for a divorce. And it breaks my heart, because as someone who, as far as I know, and I have no reason to think my wife is lying to me, my wife loves me dearly, and I love my wife dearly. We love each other more and more every day. We grow closer every day. And these last few weeks, we've grown closer and closer to God, just through different things that we've been a part of and trying to grow closer to God, and we have. And as someone who has that, I feel so blessed. And she told me yesterday, when I told her about this new family member, she said, "You better not serve me with divorce papers." And I told her, I said, "Baby, I love you more and more every day, and all of this news about people getting divorced and stuff," I said, "it just makes me want to hold on to you tighter." So if you've got a spouse that you love, grab a hold to him today. I won't be able to tonight. I had to give her a kiss on the way out, and I've got a couple of days that I won't see her, and I'll be alone, and I just want to hug her and hold her. So if you can, grab your spouse today. Hold them, hug them tight. Not just a quick kiss and hey, how you doing, but when you walk in the door and you see each other, grab them and hold them like you did when you first met. Back when everything was new and fresh. Make it new and fresh again. Kiss them long and hard on the lips and say, "Baby, I love you more and more every day." Hold on to that. So my question for you to think about this week, and I would again love for you to get in touch with me via comments on the YouTube link, or YouTube comments there if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're just listening and you want to get in touch with me via the voicemail line or the feedback, which I'll email, which I'll tell you about in just a minute from now, a couple of minutes from now. Think about this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this subject, and we'll talk about them in the next episode. What are 3 things you would change right now about your life if you had an easy button? You remember those commercials? I think it was Staples or something, just had a button. It was an easy button. You hit the button and boom, it happened. It was easy. We know in life that's not real. If you have a vice or you have something that you'd like to change, most of the time if it's something you'd like to change but haven't so far, it's because it's not easy to do. What would you change? 3 things that you would change about your life right now if you had an easy button and all you had to do was press it. I want to hear your thoughts, and we'll talk about them. I'd be interested to find out what different things there are and how many listeners and viewers have common things that they would like to change about themselves. And then the last thing in the way of review, the stuff to do review, I think I'm going to call it. I know it sounds cheesy, but it kind of falls off the tongue really easily, and I like it. I'm going to call it the stuff to do review, and I'm going to give you the first one, and I'm going to make these really short because I'm just about out of gas. Oh, it's flashing. I'm out of gas. I've got to take the next exit and get to a gas station, even if I just sit there until I stop the show. Anyway, the first one, both of them are movie reviews, but the first one you may or may not have seen by now. If you have, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you didn't like it, but it just came out on video. You can get it. I bought my copy at Walmart the day before yesterday. La La Land. If you hate musicals, you may hate La La Land. If you love musicals, you'll probably love La La Land, although there's one friend of mine who I just found out really didn't care too much for it, and I was surprised. I fell in love with La La Land from the very first scene, called Another Day of Sun. I think it's called. It's Another Day of Sun. Yeah, I think it's Another Day of Sun. That's what it's called. The opening sequence. Absolutely fantastic movie. I love the story. A lot of people said they didn't like the way it ended. I thought it ended the way it needed to end to be as powerful as it was. I made my wife go see, or I invited my wife to see it. I saw it by myself because she didn't really care. She didn't think she would want to see it. And so I saw it by myself and fell in love and just went on and on and on about it. I'm trying to see if there's a gas station here. There's not. on and on about it. So she went to see it with me and had to sit there in the theater before she could get up. She loved it so much. She said at the end, her mouth was hanging open just about. She said, I gotta sit here a minute. And then she really loved it. I don't think she loved it as much as I do. She doesn't get as emotionally invested as I do with a lot of stories like that, or it takes a certain kind, but she really did love it. So La La Land, I highly recommend. And then another one my wife and I saw 2 days ago. Today's Tuesday, yeah, so 2 days ago, we went Sunday night to see The Circle, because we both love Emma Watson, who is, if you don't know, and I'm sure you do, the girl who grew up playing Hermione in the Harry Potter movies, and then she played Belle to much acclaim recently in Beauty and the Beast, which I have a review for that. I guess I'll review in another episode. But she was the lead in this, along with Tom Hanks, in a movie called The Circle. And I'm going to tell you, you may like it, but every review I've seen agrees with me. Don't waste your money. Go wait till it comes out in Redbox, or you can stream it or something for $1.99. See something else if you're going to pay movie theater prices. That was one of the most confused, uninspired, badly plotted, badly written movies with the worst anticlimactical ending I've ever seen in my entire life. And the thing was, I halfway enjoyed the movie while it was going on. But from the very beginning, I looked over to my wife and I said, this is not written really well. She was like, its acting's okay. And in fact, there was some bad acting in it too. But it just was not good. Even though it was like a piece of food that you're eating, that the taste, you can't decide whether you like it while you're eating it. You can't decide if it's bad or tolerable. I guess that was it. I enjoyed it enough that I was because I was eating some buttery popcorn. But it by the end, and after that anticlimactical ending, I had to make a decision whether I liked it or not. And I gotta say, I don't want to see it again. I would not waste my money. Very uninspired movie. It was a good idea. It was one of those that I think would have been good on paper. I can't understand. I can see why Emma Watson would use that as a vehicle. She's trying to get her career started. Maybe she wants to be seen as much as she can. But Tom Hanks, as great a movie career as he has had, it's almost like I wonder if he didn't read the script first before signing a contract to do this film, because it was bad. I really did not like The Circle. So that's it. That's what I'm going to do. Let me give you a quick roundup of how you can get in touch with me. If you would like to get in touch with me via email, it's really easy. The email is feedback@michaelblackston.com. But I do have a contact line. Nobody ever used it before, but maybe you will now. If it's still going, Google was telling me they need to get some stuff verified. So give it a try if you want to leave me a voicemail at 706-408 I think it's 7456. 706-408-7456. I think that's the number. I'll go back and check, but I'm pretty sure if you hear it in this episode, then that is the number, because I will have checked it out before I publish this. Also, if you're watching this via YouTube and you like what you've seen, I know this was kind of long, but I had to get back into it. They won't all be this long. If you liked it by watching it or just listening to the audio while it was on YouTube, please use the subscribe button down there. I want to get as many subscribers as I can, because I want to get in touch with you. I want to build a relationship with you. My name is Michael Blackston. That's all I'm going to give you this episode, but we'll try to kick this off again and see how long we go this time for Road Noise, as together we live life 1 mile at a time. See you next time.